We fast forward now, where we meet a butcher's son from rural Bohemia, where thankfully the boy's God-given talent was recognized and encouraged, and thus the world came to know and embrace the music of Antonín Dvořák. Created a set of variations for orchestra in 1877, which he called Symphonic Variations, a very appropriate designation. First of all, unlike so many other composers of the day, Dvořák composed his own theme and did not use a popular tune. Also, the structural organization, the architecture of these 27 variations is indeed symphonic in scope, its overall layout and the way in which the variations seem to develop and often grow out of each other, like true symphonic writing, as we've already seen in this series. Dvořák's original theme is in 3 sections, like so many that we've heard, the standard A, B, A, and every one of the variations uses this same basic 3-part structure. So here's the beginning of the theme, the A section. Let's hear that again. It's not a particularly attractive theme. It's rather neutral in character. Dvořák actually first used this theme in a choral song he wrote about a poor village fiddler, which may have had some significance for him now that he was successful, considering his humble beginnings. At any rate, but here's how it sounds with the full orchestra in the very beginning of the work. You heard the strings played the theme in octaves, while the rest of the orchestra plays these simple, sustained, austere octaves like so. It's rather somber, almost mystical in its sound. But it's an excellent theme for building variations, because this unusual interval, C major with this F sharp, followed by its resolution with F natural, it's distinctive, and it's easy to recognize as we go. Now, I mentioned that the theme is in 3 sections. That's the first part. Here is the second part of the theme. And it's also rather distinctive because you hear this rising sequential thing. And this rhythm, and the third section is the first part repeated. So we have this nice symmetry again, an A, B, A simple thematic form. But now, before we take a quick trip through these variations, I want to identify a few of the motifs that are prominent to listen for. There's the first 4 bars of the theme with that odd interval which resolves. Then there are the 4 rising notes of this theme that resolve. And Dvořák will do a lot with those 4 rising notes. Then there is the middle section of the theme, the B section, and this figure. And they are usually very easy to recognize, even when everything else going on sounds unfamiliar. And so this 25-minute symphonic journey begins with the first group of variations, in which Dvořák keeps the theme basically intact, adding new little decorative figures as he goes. So in variation 1, the theme is decorated by the woodwinds with this. In variation 3, the new figure is this. There's those 4 rising notes, yes? In variation 5, the new figure is this, kind of like a little fanfare. And the theme will go underneath that. Here now is a little of variation number 7, where the new motive added is this simple thing in the strings. While above it, the woodwinds engage in a little dialogue that outlines the harmonies of the theme, like so. Just so we don't lose sight of the theme itself, Dvořák tosses in that little whimsical reference in the strings. That's our do-dee-dee-doo, sort of in double time, yes? And that compressed version of the theme now flows naturally into the next variation, variation 8. So he takes the little the second violins, violas, cellos, and this little motive keeps going now in the cellos, while above the woodwinds outline the harmonies, that odd interval, etc. from the main theme, like so. And that was variation number 8. So Dvořák, for years regarded by the musical snobs as a second-rate provincial composer who never suffered enough to write truly great music, is here displaying a remarkable sense of symphonic structure and organization, which evolves from one variation to the next instead of the usual stop and start between variations that most composers use. In variation 10, Dvořák merges two parts of the theme, its main outline with the rhythm of the middle section of the theme. So that rhythm, bum, 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 bum. So combining these two things, we get this. A brilliant idea. And so it goes with this first group, the first 17 of 27 variations, almost functioning like the first movement of a symphony. And you must hear variation number 12 in its entirety. After so much detailed, meticulous motivic writing, the music finally settles into a gorgeous lyrical interlude featuring a solo violin. And yes, it's all totally related to the original theme, structurally, motivically, harmonically, technically. But at this point in the work, it's exactly what is needed emotionally. And each of these variations has its own unique character. It's like meeting the members of a big family. They're all related by the fact that they are based on the same theme, but each has a different personality, including variation 14, the most radiant and pure of them. It's almost like a gentle prayer or chant. One writer compared it to vespers, the prayers at twilight, with the flute representing a gently tolling bell. And we hear only the basic outline of the theme, its harmonic progression underneath, and the phrase structure, and the little flute, as you'll hear. It's so moving, until the bassoon enters near the end with the actual theme. Here is variation 14. There's a grandiose, pompous variation with the 4 rising notes of the theme prominently displayed. This, like so, etc. Then he double times them. There's a charming, delicate waltz variation, and then something very notable happens. With variation 18, the key, the tonality changes for the first time in the work. Up until this point, everything has been in the home key of C major, yes? But now the architectural design of this grand work enters a new phase with this lovely pastoral variation, number 18, in the key of D major, with the theme clearly audible in the French horns and bassoons. But D major was only temporary, a transition into the key of B flat, where we will remain for the next 6 variations. And again, the architectural design of the work becomes increasingly clear, that these 6 variations in the new key of B flat will function almost like another separate movement of a symphony. And most of these B flat variations have a dance-like character, an assignment for which Dvořák was eminently qualified. There is an elegant Viennese waltz, variation number 19. But now the music moves into the minor key, B flat minor, and will remain there for the next 5 variations. But again, Dvořák's folk dance idiom is so prominent. So variation 20, original theme, remember, is here is variation 20 in the clarinets. Variation 21, the theme, remember, played by the oboe, also in a quick waltz meter. Hear that little rhythmic thing, that dislocation at the end. That is a very prominent Czech dance rhythm known as the furiant. Variation number 22 begins with the theme outlined in the low French horn, like so. Variation 23, where the outline of the theme is clearly heard in the woodwinds. But the dance-like character now fades, leading us to the single dark, ominous passage in this work, the heart of darkness, if you will, in this otherwise energetic, robust music. And the somber quality of this variation, number 24, is remarkable, and its effect is significant in the overall architecture of the work. And there's the connection with the original theme. The first 2 notes of the theme, right, these 2 notes, take these 2, add this note in the middle to make a triad, a minor triad rising, and this mournful funereal variation number 24 you just heard is a vast expansion of that simple motive. And despite his reputation as a perennially sunny, folksy composer, Dvořák obviously has taken us into a very dark and solemn place. And when we emerge, the 25th variation, the sense of relief is remarkable. It's not overly exuberant by any means, but a gentle, pastoral sense of calm. And you hear in the viola part playing this accompaniment. So gorgeous the way the harmonies change. And over this, a new woodwind melody. And here, 4 rising notes. Again, it seems that only the basic 3-part structure of the theme is present, but those 4 rising notes that we know so well from the original theme are there. And you recall then the middle section of the original theme, which is dee da dee bum be, the B section, yes, da dee It is also present now, but in this new heavenly bucolic vision into which we've emerged, that same figure becomes this, played by the flute and oboe, like a shepherd's song. How about that? Here is this exquisitely beautiful Variation 25. And now we seem to regain our footing, as it were. We are back in C major, and soon we hear the last of the 27 variations, but oddly, it's very hesitant. It just seems to tiptoe very lightly. But we finally hear the theme, as we remember it, from the opening. Even though it's in bits and pieces, I don't know why, it's very cautious. The violins are hardly the way to end this monumental work. But Dvořák does not disappoint, and this pathetic little whimper in the violins will pick up steam, and it will become this. The main theme returning at last. There's our 4 rising notes, just in time for a big finale. And the finale, get ready, is in the form of a fugue. That magnificent Baroque form that is the epitome of musical architecture, and by the way, which had become a very common way of ending a theme and variations. You present your theme, you take the theme through lots of variations, and then you close the work with a mighty fugue based on the theme. Briefly, a fugue. It's derived from the Italian word fuggire, the verb to flee or to chase. Some say it's from the Latin fuga, but at any rate, it means to chase and sort of scurry, since each of the voices in a fugue seems to follow one another around in a rather complex way. The fugue, I must add, is the hallmark of a composer's skill in writing counterpoint, the combining of multiple voices. And it's a very exacting, almost mathematical science. The undisputed master of the fugue was, of course, who else? Johann Sebastian Bach. And it's not surprising to learn that the fugue was largely discarded during the Rococo Enlightenment era as too complex, too cerebral, too dense, too difficult to follow, etc., not light and pleasing as the new style demanded. However, for any serious music student during the next 200 years, you had better learn how to write a decent fugue if you expected to graduate. And thus most every serious composer took the challenge with varying results. And I must say, fugues have the most peculiar way of popping up at the most unexpected moments. If you check the finale of Tchaikovsky's great Manfred Symphony, the finale is supposed to take place in some underground grotto where an orgy is in place. Suddenly the music stops and the violas start with and we have a fugue based on that. It's just like what? Well, at any rate, Dvořák, though, faces the challenge head on and produces a marvelous fugue to close out his symphonic variations. Now, briefly, a fugue. Just to demonstrate, a fugue begins with a theme, played without accompaniment, like so, with Bach in C major. Then a second voice enters playing the same theme, but in the dominant key, the polar key of G major, like so. Same theme, different key. But this is where things get tricky and challenging, because when this second voice enters, the first voice has to recede into the background a bit and entwine itself in a very artful way with the new second voice. So here's the first voice again, which we call the subject by itself in C major. And when the second voice enters, here's what the first voice goes on to do. And we call this the counter subject. So here's how they fit together now. The first voice, second, third voice, etc. And things begin to multiply. For as each new voice enters, all the other voices need to entwine themselves into lovely, meticulously crafted counterpoint. And this exponential increase in texture and counterpoint gets very challenging. Not to Bach, not really. He wrote fugues with 5 and 6 voices, effortlessly it seems. Incredibly constructed music. You look at it and you say, how could he possibly have figured this out? But that's as much as we need to know about a fugue. Dvořák's big closing fugue is launched with his familiar theme, and listen how it progresses as each new voice is added. And I want to point out that brilliant passage work in the violins, this stuff that you heard now, which Dvořák uses in the fugue, is actually a sped-up version of the first 4 notes of our theme, etc. And as in any good fugue, there are numerous episodes where the theme is now taken through various keys. There are a couple of new motifs that are tossed in, such as this. Very good Baroque-like stuff. And the excitement builds as more and more iterations of the theme are piled on, resulting in what we call the stretto, where the multiple entrances of the theme are sped up and compressed, like so in Dvořák's fugue. You hear the theme. You're going to learn this, and you'll hear it speed up. Here is the passage as I attempt it. Now, what is it? That is the first 4 notes of the theme, right? Again. Now it speeds up. And we end up here. Sounds like Dvořák is still doing his Wagner thing from his youth, from Lohengrin. And we hear the horns play the theme. And the trumpets. And the trombones. As intense a dramatic buildup as you will ever hear. And when it's clear that we have arrived at what will surely be the final grandiose statement of the big theme, what do you think happens? Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Antonín Dvořák. It's a polka. And hey, why not? If Chopin could use a polonaise for his final variation, why shouldn't Dvořák kick back, pop open a Pilsner, and just enjoy himself with one of Bohemia's great national dances? It's almost as if he's admitting that all of this grandiose, technical, dramatic bluster is not really who he is. He's just a simple backwoods guy who loved his country, his culture, his home, and his family, all of which is true. And the theme is gliding in the strings in the middle of all of this. And that little rising motive is actually a new polka-ized version of the 4 rising notes, which now takes on a life of its own. Again, let's review. The theme, by now you've grown to love it, I'm sure. It is this. The poor fiddlers, the 4 rising notes. And it will serve as the subject now, this theme, as the subject of the fugue played by the second violins and oboe. Very proper for a fugue and those 4 rising notes. And when the violas and bassoon enter with the same subject now, but in the polar key of G major, the second violins now go on to the new counter subject, which is this. Very Baroque-like. It will interact beautifully and technically correct with the first subject in the violas. And when the first violins now enter with the subject back in the home key of C major, everybody else keeps playing with more new counterpoint as things get more complex and more challenging for the composer to manage by shaping it all into a dramatic, satisfying whole and sustaining the tension and our attention as we approach the final climax of this great work. And that Dvořák does beautifully, making especially effective use of those 4 rising notes of the theme. don't just leave us hanging. And he won't, because there's a coda to this magnificent work, a breathless, deliriously happy coda, and of course, technically correct at the same time, being based on the theme's 4 notes, or in this case, it's this. Enough of the technical stuff, just enjoy it. Here goes the coda to the end.